Oh.
On the heels of an insanely successful reboot sequel of the Jurassic Park franchise, Universal Pictures knew that their gamble on 2015's Jurassic World had paid off, and quickly greenlit a new film that would continue the adventures of the tried and true cast of the previous installment. Armed with a new director in J.A. Bayona and a willingness to push the logical envelopes further than ever, the fifth film in the franchise performed well at the box office, but struggled to connect with both critics and audiences. Hi, my name is Brian I, and welcome back to Jurassic Kingdom as we continue to explore the declining quality of the franchise, where each sequel went wrong, and how they could have been fixed. This is How to Fix Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. I will not lie to you, I have been dreading this video. Unlike my trepidation over How to Fix Jurassic World, where I worried about fans carrying fires and burning me at the pitchfork for daring to fix what is admittedly a good time at the movies, I was loath to do this one for an entirely different reason. So far in this series, I have attempted to follow the general beats of the delivered products, with Lost World straying the furthest by being a fusion of the film and the novel. But with Fallen Kingdom, nearly the entire movie is a total joke, and there are precious few redeeming aspects which I could be said to have enjoyed. While not as big a missed opportunity as its successor Dominion, Fallen Kingdom is absolutely the one in need of the most reworking. I have struggled to figure out what this movie is about, and the best I can come up with is that the entire film exists to set up a third Jurassic World, which would feature a planet overrun with dinosaurs. That's the whole point of this exercise. It was such a lazy narrative that they essentially copy and pasted the villain and his evil plan of collecting and exploiting dinosaurs for profit from the second film of the previous trilogy. In fact, this movie is so derivative of the other four films that it almost never feels like its own thing. The only new concept it seems to adopt, in fact, is introduce a ticking clock element with the inclusion of the volcano subplot. But even that is not the primary focus of the film, wrapping up well before the halfway mark and revealing itself to be a shell of the promise it made in the opening half hour. Fallen Kingdom starts with what might just be the best cold open of any of the Jurassic sequels, even if the reason for it to happen is hard to swallow. A team of unnamed specialists return to Isla Nublar to recover the DNA of the Indominus Rex from its carcass at the bottom of the Mosasaur Lagoon, necessitating an underwater recovery operation, a tech guy on the ground to open the sea gate to allow the submarine entry from the sea, and a fully crewed helicopter for the extraction. The scene is well shot, heart-poundingly effective, and it features both Rexy and the Mosasaur, which is ultimately able to escape from its pen by scene's end. But despite how good this opening was, its underlying narrative purpose, the recovery of the Indominus' DNA, is just about the silliest, dumbest thing the Jurassic Park franchise had done to this point, which is saying something after both Jurassic Park 3 and Jurassic World. Think about it. With all of the tech and research, the genetic samples, and God knows what else Wu and his team removed from the island before it all went cattywampus, you mean to tell us that not a single drop of Indominus DNA had been kept, preserved, and extracted from the site? What was Wu carrying on the chopper, if not the potential to create another Indominus?
Fraction of the size?
What were the writers even on when they pitched this? The entire plot of the movie hinges on this stunningly inept conceit. It's bonkers. After what is regardless a really great scene, we are introduced to what we expect is the main thrust of the film, that the dinosaurs left on Nublar are now at the mercy of Mount Sibo, a volcano on the island that has hitherto never been acknowledged. On the surface, it's not a terrible concept and naturally has the timetable stakes that could make for a tension-laden narrative. Dig a little deeper and you have to ask yourself, Masrani, with all its resources and money, cannot itself fund a recovery operation to rescue its assets? The very expensive assets they still presumably own? I mean, within the context of the lore, it's been very clear since the first film how lucrative dinosaurs can be. The entire plot of Jurassic Park happens as a result of Bison coveting embryos. And it also happens to be Bison's major operation in the following film, Dominion. That means that Masrani Global, which should certainly still be around considering how diverse its portfolio is,
he's so diversified he doesn't even know what he owns.
Just decided to let their assets expire without any attempt to salvage what they could, despite the fact that there still seems to be plenty of money left to make from the dinosaurs themselves. What I'm getting at is that of all the insane, absurd, reality-shattering things that happen in this film, things like Owen being swallowed by pyroclastic cloud without being fried alive, the fact that the main crew never get found out the entire time aboard the transport ship, Wheatley's hysterically stupid death, we cannot lose sight of the forest for these trees. The entire core plot of this film isn't just flawed, it's rotten. And this decay pervades every facet of the movie. From its plot, to the cast of assembled characters, to the third act twist, there is very little here that isn't infected by the film's blatant lack of purpose beyond being a springboard for Dominion and its willingness to scavenge parts of the other movies in the franchise to fashion itself together. I have already mentioned how Eli Mills and his brilliant plan is just discount Peter Ludlow with an even more harebrained scheme, but there are other elements that Fallen Kingdom decides to make a formula. Since Jurassic Park 3, the franchise has felt it necessary to introduce some dinosaur that is bigger or badder than we've ever seen. For Jurassic World, it's forgivable since the film hinges on the size, ferocity, and psychopathic behavior of the Indominus. But Fallen Kingdom learns the wrong lesson from its two predecessors, a mistake Dominion was doomed to repeat, and delivers the Indoraptor, the fraction of the size evolution of the Indominus design. I'll get into that thing later. Fallen Kingdom also pillages its predecessor for its dynamic between its two main characters, Owen and Claire. Once again failing to deliver on interesting, convincing romantic relationships, this sequel chooses to once again start the movie with these two having decided to end their association before the movie even starts, only to find their attraction for each other as the plot progresses. Giving this movie its due, Bryce Dallas Howard and Chris Pratt have way more chemistry here, even if their romance still leaves a lot to be desired. It seems more like an excuse, in fact, to use a really strained metaphor that Owen and Claire are the parents of this new, boundary-pushing world. The filmmakers, never considering they might just be a little heavy-handed, then
Front hand!
us to make sure we get it by making Owen and Claire parents to Maisie, who herself is representative of this inevitable scientific progress. Speaking of Maisie, Fallen Kingdom also falls into the old Jurassic trap of having to shove children into the film, but nowhere else in the franchise does it feel more unnecessary, more forced, and more haphazard than in Fallen Kingdom. Isabella Sermon acquits herself really well in this movie and provides one of the best child performances in the entire saga, making Maisie Lockwood a surprisingly likable and convincing character. But that in no way changes the fact that the character herself is not only useless, but as I mentioned, represents what is meant to be a seismic shift in the lore of the Jurassic movies. 5 of 6 movies into this franchise, we learn that John Hammond was not alone in his quest to recall dinosaurs from the grave, and that he was inextricably linked with a man named Benjamin Lockwood. We also learned that the reason for the inevitable dissolution of their partnership was that Ben had used their cloning technology to revive his dead daughter, Maisie being that clone, which greatly upset Hammond. I'll talk about how Dominion undoes this lore in my next How to Fix, but I want to really lay into this movie for what it gives us without the context of the follow-up. Up to this point in the franchise, no hint that a Ben Lockwood, who was involved intimately with Jurassic Park, has ever been made. Where was he during the events of Lost World, where he might have lent a hand to help his old friend? Why was he not a partner in Masrani's rebuilding of Isla Nublar? There's a half dozen junctures in the narrative of the franchise where Ben Lockwood and his exceeding wealth would have been a game changer, but instead, we just get vague explanations for his absence from everything that has happened. And then there's Maisie, a clone of Ben Lockwood's own daughter. Again, I'm taking Fallen Kingdom at face value here without the twist we get in Dominion. John Hammond, at no point in this franchise, has been shown to be so opposed to these scientific breakthroughs.
I simply don't understand this Luddite attitude, especially from a scientist. How can we stand in the light of discovery and not act?
Going further, John Hammond is demonstrated to be a compassionate man, capable of great acts of kindness and empathy. It seems completely out of character that he would both balk at the possibility of major scientific breakthrough and prevent his supposed best friend from mending his broken heart, even in such an unorthodox fashion. Additionally, The math does not math. If Lockwood was still a partner in InGen in 1997, there is zero chance Peter Ludlow would have succeeded in wresting power from Hammond so he could raid Site B for Jurassic Park San Diego. Additionally, Hammond had already abandoned the dream of Jurassic Park by this point in the franchise. That means Hammond and Lockwood had their falling out prior to the events of Lost World, and according to Mills, that falling out had to do with Charlotte Lockwood's clone being made. Even if that's not the case, Hammond dies in 1998, so we can safely assume the split happens between the events of Jurassic Park and the events of Lost World, which means that Maisie would have to be at least 21 years old for it to work, not the 9 years old she is in Fallen Kingdom. And even if we make the assumption too that it took a couple tries to get it right, which is ludicrous considering they were able to build back dinosaurs from what amounted to scraps of DNA, given the technology and the skill of Henry Wu and his geneticists, how did it take a full decade after Hammond's passing to be successful? Then there is the coming twist in Dominion, which undoes the entire conceit that Lockwood himself was behind the cloning, which Eli Mills specifically says is behind the failure of the partnership between Lockwood and Hammond.
What do you think drove Hammond and Lockwood apart? Lockwood never had a grandchild. He just wanted his daughter back, and he had the technology. He made her again.
When it's revealed that his daughter created Maisie, none of it makes sense. Fallen Kingdom is brimming with elements that no one seemed to fully consider, like why did Claire bring a paleo veterinarian who's never even seen a dinosaur before? Putting aside the stretch that it is bringing someone with that particular skill set, the park was presumably full of dinosaur veterinarians. You mean to tell me Claire couldn't get a hold of a single one of them who would want to accompany them on this operation? On the subject of the team she put together, why in the hell did she go with an easily spooked tech guy who'd never dealt with the island's infrastructure when there was already an established comic relief character that would have been better for the mission? I thought Franklin was a great character and Justice Smith is a genuinely funny guy. But why was he even there when Jake Johnson's Lowry was clearly the right choice for this? You can make the case that Lowry would have been too cowardly to return to the island, but he's also shown to cow to Claire's demands, and it would have been really funny to watch Jake Johnson channel his new girl character Nick as Claire bursts back into his life to ask this huge favor of him. Now let's look at Claire, who is an almost completely different character in this movie. In the 3 years between films, she has left the world of park management and high-end chic clothing to be a salt-of-the-earth woman who cares deeply for the animals she once saw only as assets. We could call this character development, I guess, except it's never really addressed. She never intimates why this change even came to pass. Further, no mention is made of her complicity in the events of Jurassic World, which likely would have come with some sort of legal consequence. There's a built-in redemption arc here that Ben Lockwood pays lip service to, but it's at no point fleshed out, or even addressed again. Poof. Claire has a lot to answer for, and the fact that not only do we not see the fallout of her mishandling of the Indominus incident, the writers apparently didn't think it was worthy to even just explain away with exposition, even though it's perfectly ripe for the narrative's purpose. What if what motivates Claire at the beginning of the film isn't a wholesome desire to save the dinosaurs from a lava bath, but rather a selfish desire for redemption in the eyes of the public? But through the events of Jurassic Kingdom, she gradually comes to truly appreciate the lives of these animals and actually feel guilty for what she has done. I mean, I barely did anything there. It wouldn't even require major changes to the film at all. Her actions in the movie can stay the same, but they'd feel more convincing and more satisfying if they were informed by growth. Owen in this film is just Owen. Again, the writers seem loath to provide Owen with anything like development. He's just so cool. He even gets an action movie fight scene during the third act to hammer home how absolutely dope and fierce this guy is. And we circle back to how this movie is so derivative of the other movies in the franchise that it straight up lists the same Owen and Blue ending from Jurassic World, so that we leave the characters in the same relative position as before, only this time Blue has a lot more space to run around. Then there's the so-called main event, the Indoraptor, the series' dumbest creation. Before I poke more holes in it than a Triceratops skull, I do want to say that the creature design is fantastic. It's a really cool looking animal, and I love how sleek it is and how it moves, and that is the extent of my positive feelings towards the Indoraptor. Firstly, its origins. I know this has been said to death, but it's so absolutely ridiculous, I have to point it out again to make sure we all remember how fast and loose the writers played with logic in Fallen Kingdom. The film specifically says the Indoraptor is a hybrid between the Indominus Rex and raptors. Guys, the Indominus is already part raptor. It was a huge part of why it was so dangerous and how it was able to temporarily become the Raptor Alpha. What? So they wanted Blue for both her DNA and so that she could raise the next Indoraptor because the prototype was so volatile. But how exactly did they make the first one? They must have had raptor DNA to work from, which means they could have just made more raptors. And they had extensive notes and video logs from Owen's time as the raptor trainer. He's not the only behaviorist in the world. They could have easily hired a newer, less conscientious wrangler to raise a new set of raptors, the alpha of which could have also raised the next Indoraptor. Okay, sure, having Blue already trained and showing empathy expedited that process, but Henry Wu and Eli Mills were acting like there was absolutely no other alternative here, and as if the entire project lived and died on having Blue in that lab. Then there's the whole laser thing. Do I have to verbalize why this concept is so absurd? You use a gun to point out your target. So use the gun. It's not like sending a violent psychotic dinosaur is going to be any less covert or less stealthy. You're basically advertising who exactly is responsible for the shredding of your victim. Not for nothing either, but why bother training the animals at all if the prototype Indoraptor was already capable of executing the laser command? It's all bad. It's such an inconsistent villain, too. One moment, it's tearing through people and places as if it just downed a few gallons of pre-workout, and the next, it's hunting like it's stuck in a Zack Snyder slow-mo fight scene. Maisie would be dead 10 times over if it didn't become Flash from Zootopia every time it got close to her. On the positive side of things, I will say that I loved the gothic horror vibe J.A. Bayona was going for with the ending, and there's a lot of great shots in the movie. Rexy looks a lot better than she did in Jurassic World, which I appreciate. I know she's supposed to look a little emaciated and older in Jurassic World, and that's fine, but you can tell they focused a lot more attention on making the Indominus look incredible, to the point where I thought in a couple shots that I was looking at a practical robotic and not enough time on Old Faithful. And probably the best part of Fallen Kingdom's legacy is that it was the first Jurassic movie since Lost World whose toy line was not made by those yutzes at Hasbro. Mattel may not be perfect and sometimes they leave something to be desired, but here's a newsflash. They care so much more for this brand than Hasbro ever did. This is a bit of a tangent, but take it from someone who played with the Kenner Jurassic Park and Lost World toy lines, lived through the disappointment of the Jurassic Park 3 toy line, and the 14-year repaint train that followed, only to nearly lose my lunch at what Hasbro crapped out for Jurassic World. As a point of fact, and this is true, Jurassic World is the only movie in the franchise where I did not buy at least one thing from the toy line that accompanied it. I refused to reward Hasbro for such a lazy, slapdash, pathetic, and expensive set of plastic garbage. If you're listening to this and you worked on that toy line, I am sorry. But I hope that you graduated elementary school and switched careers while you were at it. I generally try to stay away from vitriol in my videos as I don't usually find it tasteful, but right here I am matching energies. Hasbro spat on fans and kids alike with their abominable products, and they deserve the same in return. Absolutely shameful. Mattel, in contrast, are about as fan-centric as it gets. I never in a million years thought I'd see an in-scale sauropod on store shelves, and these guys actually went, nah brah, here's 5 of them. They've had legacy toys, play sets, premium figures, an assortment of humans, dinosaurs, vehicles, digging deep into Jurassic lore to deliver everything Hasbro wouldn't even dream about doing. So if you spend your time giving Mattel grief, just remember this. These are the good times. It could not only be worse, it could literally be the worst. Okay, let's get back to Fallen Kingdom, which is, of the 6 movies, my least favorite. That's right. I put Dominion over this one. I'll get into my reasons for that in the next How to Fix. But how do we fix Fallen Kingdom? Because the last 3 movies can be bettered without completely changing the plot. Yeah, I did some maneuvering with Lost World, but honestly, if you cut the San Diego scene for more island escape stuff and resolved Ian Malcolm's character arc, I think it could have been a good follow-up. Great. Even. If the movies were broken cars, we repaired a few dents, Fonzied the rattle out of the motors, and slapped on a new paint job. But Fallen Kingdom is different. Fallen Kingdom, as a concept, as a plot, just falls apart if you think about it for more than a few minutes. None of it makes much sense. So we're tearing the whole thing apart and rebuilding it from the ground up. As ever, keep in mind that for this story, we are keeping the continuity of the Jurassic Park trilogy and Jurassic World as they were released to us, not any of the continuities I've created for this series. If you need a refresher on the franchise, find a link to some recaps in the description below, but why are you even watching this right now? That's so weird. You're honestly a little weird. So strap into the gyrosphere and let's roll this thing right off a cliff because things are about to get spicy. Once more, Fallen Kingdom's opening scene is spectacular. The way it's shot, the way it plays out, it's very classic Jurassic. The underlying purpose is flawed, but the concept itself is solid. It's definitely something we should keep. All we have to do is change the circumstances here and try to tie it into the larger story. So instead of seeking to retrieve the DNA of the Indominus, our group of mercenaries is there for a reason that won't become clear until later in the narrative. Their mission will take them to the Innovation Center instead of near the lagoon, but their helicopter will idle right where the Mosasaurus took the Indominus 3 years prior to this story. Same atmosphere and vibe, it's still raining and it's at night for extra cover. They will split into 3 teams, one that goes to Henry Wu's lab, one that goes to the control room, and the last remaining behind standing guard at the chopper. The teams of 2 inside each have a tech guy that goes to the computers in their respective locations and do their computer stuff. For the lab, it appears to be a download of some kind. In the control room, the tech increases the power on some system. The outside team starts to hear the footsteps of an approaching behemoth and begin hurrying the men inside over the radio. The 4 guys inside finish their mission and rush outside, only for Rexy to appear from the Tyrannosaurus Kingdom entrance. She chases them down, and we can have a similar set of events from this point forward, with one of the guys being left behind and thrown a rope ladder. The scene ends more or less the same way, with the guy getting chomped by the Mosasaur, except this time the reptile does not escape its confines. Yet. Winky face. The mission complete, the chopper flies away, and then we get the tag 6 months later. Here we re-meet Claire Deering. We learn that she and the rest of Jurassic World's surviving leadership have spent the last 3 years in and out of court. Her Masrani Global lawyers are able to exonerate her from the decision to not immediately evacuate the park, reasoning that her experience with the Asset Containment Unit's abilities to recapture dinosaurs led her to believe they could reacquire the Indominus Rex safely and without otherwise disrupting Jurassic World's normal operations. As Simon Masrani, the one who ordered the Indominus in the first place, is dead, and Henry Wu, the one who created it, is in the wind, the company itself would be held liable for the injuries and deaths sustained during the incident, and the surviving leadership are absolved. But in the court of public opinion, Claire has already been tried and convicted. In a conversation with her sister, Claire intimates that she doesn't blame people, and that maybe she should have to face some consequences for the part she played in the fall of Jurassic World. We are then reintroduced to Owen, who is building his cabin in the middle of nowhere. If you hated my Owen from How to Fix Jurassic World, firstly, I'm sorry, not sorry. And secondly, the original version of that character is back now. But let's give him an emotional journey this time. At a certain point during his work, a lone wolf wanders out of the surrounding forest, catches sight of him, and begins to approach, but Owen does not lose his composure, staring it down. The wolf stops, regards him, then returns to the woods. The whole point of this brief scene is to prompt Owen to look through videos and pictures he has of his time raising the Raptor Squad, reminding the audience of Owen's connection with Blue and providing the impetus for Owen's arc through this story. The scene ends with Owen catching sight of his television, which is breaking the news that Mount Sibo is erupting. Claire is also learning about what's happening. She meets with one Eli Mills, who we are repurposing to be the new head of Masrani Global. He has almost single-handedly raised the company's name from out of the mud left behind by Jurassic World's failure, and is known to be particularly risk-adverse. Here we learn that Jurassic World, like Site B, had run on the geothermal power of the dormant volcano. They had tapped deep into Mount Sibo, but they'd also had the greatest experts in the world signing off on every step of the process to make sure they didn't accidentally set off a chain reaction that would cause it to erupt. Claire asks how this is possible, and Mills says it's not. The dormancy of the volcano had been absolute, and automation of the systems that drew power from it needed little to no maintenance. Whatever had happened was not natural. Claire wants to do something to try and reverse the damage and or save the dinosaurs, but Mills is actually ahead of her. He reveals that he was already mobilizing an effort to move as many dinosaurs as possible off the island. Isla Nublar was still privately owned by Masrani Global, and the animals were theirs to do with what they would. Nothing was stopping the company itself from intervening on behalf of the animals. Claire, still technically a Masrani employee if on indefinite administrative leave, requests the company also attempt to reverse the damage, reasoning that the cost of such an operation could be mitigated by this action. Mills, eventually a little reluctantly, agrees to the plan. Mills wasn't writing a blank check, however. He had almost no confidence that they'd be able to stop Mount Sibo from erupting, and he was going to bank more on the extraction of the dinosaurs. Through the next few scenes, we see the scope of their plan. Claire would recruit a few specialists to get on site and determine what happened, and if it was possible to stop the eruption, while Mills would organize a fleet of ships staffed with a mix of former Jurassic World zookeepers and the best animal wranglers and mercenaries money could buy, to collect as many specimens as they could if Claire and her team were unsuccessful for removal to Isla Sorna. They would have to do so in secrecy, however, since Sorna was still under the ownership of the Costa Rican government, and a restricted location. Mills also has a scene where he finishes explaining this plan to a boardroom before adjourning, and where a familiar face confronts him afterward. It's Tim Murphy, now the head of InGen, who questions Mills about not consulting him before giving the green light for the operation. We learn in this interaction that the idealistic Simon Masrani had installed Tim Murphy and also ensured that firing him would be virtually impossible, but that Mills and Tim also have a contentious relationship. Mills sanctimoniously reminds Tim that InGen was a subsidiary, wholly owned by the Masrani Corporation. Murphy argues that it was InGen's work at stake, and his security division should at least be part of the operation. Mills, of course, denies him, citing their failure at Jurassic World and Henry Wu's disappearance as factors. Through implication, we get the sense that Mills believes Tim knows something about Wu's whereabouts and current activities, and that what is about to happen will draw that all into the light. When Mills is gone, Tim makes a call and tells the person on the other end they have a new problem. Claire's recruits obviously include Lowry, because I already explained how silly it is Jake Johnson wasn't hired to come back. Injustice to an insane degree. It also includes one of Jurassic World's best site engineers, a young woman named Zia Rodriguez. Again, I felt that Daniela Pineda, like Justice Smith and Isabella Sermon, was a great addition to the cast, but whose character didn't make much sense in the context of the film, until her existence is justified by the events of the narrative. I'd like to recast that same character as someone who would actually make sense to go on this mission. The last person Claire asked to go is obviously Owen, for the same reason she wanted him to help her find her nephews in Jurassic World. He knew the animals better than anyone else, and they would need someone on hand to guide them through the park's dangers. Owen is at first reluctant. I really actually liked his attitude at the beginning of the movie, that maybe they should let the dinosaurs die. It's one of the few moments of actual character that Owen demonstrates in the entire franchise, a continuation of his sentiment in Jurassic World that
maybe progress should lose for once.
I'd like to keep that, since it really serves to humanize Owen, showing that he has a complicated view on everything, with his distaste about the ethics of resurrecting extinct animals pushing up against his definitive affection for Blue. Claire will, of course, appeal to his relationship with the animal, which will ultimately convince him, but he also seems to be very concerned that they were moving the dinosaurs to Isla Sorna. We don't know why, yet. Winky face. Now we can set our main characters on their respective paths and learn more about them on the journey back to Jurassic World. Lowry is a character that will need to overcome his fears to succeed, like Justice Smith's Franklin. Zia would be characterized as practical and maybe a little cold, seemingly more preoccupied with the problem of what went wrong with the geothermal systems than with saving any of the dinosaurs. Claire is looking for redemption. Owen wants to save Blue, and also... question mark? Unlike in Fallen Kingdom, Claire's team isn't heading into an already established operation. They are the first incursion onto the island, so far as we know. And the plan is to exfiltrate with the much larger team, who would, as a fallback, get the animals off Nublar if they fail. All four of the people on this team know the island intimately, at least the parts of it that were once pertinent to their jobs. Collectively, they knew where to find everything they'd need to both survive and solve the mystery of why Mount Sibo, once considered completely safe, was suddenly active again. Their helicopter lands them outside the main area of the park. Owen reasons correctly that the Rex will have claimed that area around it as her territory, and after the chopper takes off, they make their way on foot to Main Street. Along the way, they will encounter a herd of brachiosaurs or apatosaurs passing through a jungle trail, drawing the awe of the characters, harkening back to the original film. Meanwhile, the extraction team is sailing on the Pacific, having left the Costa Rican mainland. Ken Wheatley is introduced here. I'm not going to change much about his character characterization as a gruff a-hole. I think he works well as is. Instead of a single giant ship, however, he is in charge of 3 smaller cargo ships, which are still very large, which will provide safe transport for the dinosaurs. He will be conversing over the phone with Eli Mills, who is golfing. Mills seems only interested with the preservation of the animals and talks over Wheatley's concerns about the danger posed by the volcano. Mills has enlisted every willing, relevant Jurassic World staffer to work under Wheatley to ensure the operation runs as smoothly as possible. And here he says something interesting, that whatever the outcome, they'll be flushing a mysterious him out of hiding. Just as Mills is ending the call, Wheatley walks up to his second in command, and we see it's Barry Simbene. Barry confirms their heading and that their team members are ready for a landing within the hour. On the island, Owen gets annoyed when Lowry has to take a break. He seems almost obsessed with fixing the issue with the volcano. Claire pulls him aside, and here we get our first inkling of the relationship they share post-Jurassic World. Apparently, Claire had asked him to lay low as she dealt with the media circus. It had hurt Owen, who felt kind of pushed away, but Claire saw it as protecting him. She asks him what's going on, as his attitude is so bizarrely intense, so far removed from the cool under pressure version of him that she's used to. But Owen throws it back in her face that it's like the first time she was showing interest in how he was feeling in years. And without directly answering, he starts to stalk off, leaving her confused about his reaction. But before he can get too far, that old, familiar roar echoes through the jungle. Owen stops the team dead in their tracks and calls for them to stand still. The Rex passes by close, but we never see her. We only hear her footsteps and her snuffling as she stalks somewhere beyond our sight. The distant thunder of Mount Sibo intrudes on the scene, and it seems to change Rexy's intentions. She moves away from them, and once the footsteps fade, the team continues on. They find themselves on Main Street again. From here, Lowry skittishly leads them back to the control room, humorously terrified by every odd sound and falling object. Once inside, he is able to reboot the program, mirroring the tech who got in during the opening sequence. With Zia standing at his side, he reviews the program. He quickly determines that someone has been in the system within the last year, and that they had clumsily attempted to hide their tracks within the code. Zia, watching him work closely, asks him to check if they had been in the controls for the geothermal power. A moment later, Lowry confirms that, in fact, whoever had accessed Jurassic World's protected network had altered the automated systems regulating the geothermal output of Mount Sibo, and it was now drawing an ungodly amount of energy from the volcano. It was causing the volcano to reactivate again. The team realizes Mount Sibo's impending eruption was deliberate. Someone wanted the volcano to blow, but why? Owen is more concerned with whether it was reversible. Lowry says he can't do anything from the computer. Things had advanced too far. Zia, however, thinks that if she is able to get to the primary controls at the base of Mount Sibo, they could possibly quell a full eruption. They depart the control room, with Claire alerting the incoming fleet of their intentions. As they do, the ships of Wheatley's fleet arrive at Jurassic World's abandoned docks. The mobilization is swift, Barry commandeering a troop of crew members comprised of both mercenaries and former park employees. He is tasked specifically with finding carnivores and aggressive species, while the vast majority of the forces are capturing the more docile animals. They soon come across a trio of Metriacanthosauruses who have just brought down a Corythosaurus. Here we have a wrangling scene wherein a member of the mercenaries is killed in the process, driving home just how truly dangerous this operation is. Ultimately, the dinosaurs are brought under heel and acquired. A montage of scenes sees different groups capturing several different species of dinosaurs, including ones we've seen before in the franchise, like Gallies and Stegosaurus, as well as newer ones like the ones we see in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, like Sinoceratops and Baryonyx. Claire's team is too far into the island to have yet come across the newcomers. They have commandeered an old Jurassic World vehicle to traverse the island faster. Their trek takes them across the gyrosphere plains, where they still see the evidence of the fall of Jurassic World. They pass near the skeleton of an Apatosaurus, and Claire wonders out loud if she and Owen had once been there. Owen confirms that they had, and they share a quiet moment of reflection. On cue, the volcano rumbles ominously, and it draws their attention to Mount Sibo, where Owen spots a cloud of dust. It's another vehicle. Claire reasons that the Masrani Wranglers could not have made it this far into the island yet. Whoever this was, maybe they knew what was happening with the volcano. Owen guns the engine, but the vehicle suddenly stalls out because it's out of gas. The team has no choice. They get out and they start to run. Barry and other group leaders are reporting to Wheatley over radio what their individual groups had captured so far. Barry reports his casualties sullenly. Wheatley isn't happy, but rallies his Wranglers, reminding them that the job was just beginning. Wheatley signs off and turns to someone, revealing that they had one goal: to recapture the Tyrannosaur. Meanwhile, a previously unintroduced group, wildly driving one of Jurassic World's old utility vehicles, skids outside the bunker where the controls for the geothermal power is housed. They make their way through the blast doors, and as the dust clears, we see the person leading them, the missing geneticist, Henry Wu. He is with a small group of InGen security forces. He directs them to get to work on the equipment within the bunker. Claire's team rushes up the mountain as it continues to rumble threateningly. A terrified Tyrannosaurus herd appears from out of nowhere, blocking the path and bellowing loudly. The team tries to dodge them, but before they can react appropriately, a Carnotaurus appears to attack the herbivores. In honor of Camp Cretaceous, this Carnotaur has burn scars from its encounter with the campers. Owen manages to lead them around the Carnotaur's takedown of one of the Tyrannosaurs, but Zia accidentally sneezes, a clear callback to the Jurassic Park novel. Winky face. Drawing the attention of Toro. The dinosaur gives chase. One harrowing sequence later, Claire, Owen, Zia, and Lowry make it safely to the bunker, Toro destroying Wu's vehicle in the process. Inside the bunker, the InGen security guys hold our main characters at gunpoint. Wu appears in front of them, confused at their presence on the island. An equally surprised Claire demands to know what he's doing on Nublar. Wu tells her she knows precisely why he's still there, and realization dawns on her. Instead of immediately explaining the situation to the clueless Owen, Lowry, and Zia, Claire declares that they were there to keep Mount Sibo from destroying the island. So too was Wu's group, but despite his brilliance, he was no engineer. Zia cracks her knuckles and, along with Lowry, gets to work. The quakes from the volcano are getting worse as Wheatley's group closes in on the wrecks. I'm not going to specify what happens in this scene, except to say that it is an intense, frightening scene in which several members of Wheatley's team are killed by the wrecks, but they eventually bring her down. We'll also get a quick scene revealing that Mills is golfing in nearby Costa Rica with a small group, including a concerned-looking Tim Murphy, to whom he makes a cocky remark about his suitability in the business world. Perhaps, he remarks, Tim should have stuck to the scientists as his mentor wanted, instead of following in his grandfather's footsteps. Back on the docks of Isla Nublar, several species of dinosaur are being loaded into their various cargo ships for transport to Isla Sorna. Herbivores are being loaded onto 2 of the ships, while the flagship is being loaded with the carnivores. Wheatley takes a tooth off of the Rex instead of a Stegosaurus as it's loaded into the ship. In the bunker, in the midst of a particularly loud and long quake, Zia manages to reset some program to stabilize the energy output from the mountain. The rumbling settles. A sense of relief passes through the group. Owen now pulls Claire aside and asks to know what it was that Claire knew about Wu being on the island. Claire looks uncertain at first, but then relents. As everyone was aware, the Indominus Rex had a sibling. What very few people knew, however, was that the animal was still alive. Let me take a pause in the narrative here for a moment and address, like I did in my previous How to Fix, how silly it was for the filmmakers to focus on 2 Indominus eggs in the opening shot of that film, only for one of them to be killed off-screen by the other. It was a Chekhov's gun that never goes off. When it didn't happen in Jurassic World, I reasoned that the sibling would be part of the follow-up, or at least the conclusion of the trilogy. And when it never materialized in Dominion, it automatically made Jurassic World, to me, that much weaker as a story. Maybe the filmmakers couldn't figure out how to introduce the sibling into the sequels without treading the same ground, as if that was a problem given their propensity to steal concepts wholesale from themselves, which is the same problem that I wrestled with when trying to make this story feel fresh, while also picking up a dangling plot thread to make the film Jurassic World more satisfying. Hopefully I've come up with an interesting take that doesn't simply repeat the previous film, and I'm able to fire the Chekhov's gun that the previous film left on the table in its very first act. So while Claire had been directed to explain to anyone outside the know, including Simon Masrani himself, that the sibling had been killed and eaten by the one we see in Jurassic World, the truth was that the sibling had issues. Wu interjects here, taken aback with Claire for disclosing privileged information. Claire's not impressed, reasoning that they were only there to help. She tells him that if he doesn't explain it, she will. Whatever InGen and Wu were doing was none of their business anyway. Wu reluctantly explains to Owen, Lowry, and Zia that the Indominus' siblings suffered from physical deformities and development issues that had caused it to be bullied by the animal from Jurassic World. Sensing an opportunity to discover how to perfect their formula, Wu had segregated the sibling, which we'll refer to as Indominus 2 for the sake of clarity, and kept it a secret outside a very small circle of InGen employees. After Jurassic World fell and his healthy hybrid had been killed, Wu had focused all his attention on learning why Indominus 2 had not grown properly, and why its more perfected sibling had failed to dominate in the same way that the Tyrannosaur had before and after Jurassic World. They had kept their secret hidden in old Jurassic Park facilities that Masrani Global was just not privy to. In the aftermath of this revelation, the stability of the volcano suddenly collapses again. Zia hurriedly explained that their actions had come too late. They had to abandon the mission and abandon the island. Owen loudly objects to aborting the operation, but Zia is firm. There was nothing more that could be done. It was time to leave. Owen reluctantly relents, but with Wu's vehicle destroyed and Toro presumably still in the area outside, the supergroup is forced to use the underground engineering hallways that connect to various parts of the island, which Wu's group seems hesitant to do. As they run, with Zia leading, and as the volcano continues to rock the island, Wu and his group insist they get out of the tunnels as soon as possible. They explain that they had stopped using the tunnels because people had started going missing when making runs to other parts of the island. Whatever was in there, it left no survivors. The InGen security leader radios ahead to let their people at the hidden InGen facility know to prep the Indominus 2 for transport. Claire is horrified and she protests, after what happened on this island, how could Wu possibly think it was a good idea to take the Indominus 2 off site? Wu says that the key to understanding the flaws in the healthy Indominus was to study the deformed one, and Mills would destroy it on site just to prevent another potential PR catastrophe from striking Masrani Global. He and his team, who are armed, will suddenly stop at an intersection, causing Claire's group to also halt, only to find themselves staring down the barrel of the guns. Next, we would get some scenes of the mad scramble Wheatley, Barry, and the Masrani extraction team, as well as the remaining loose dinosaurs, are undergoing as the island begins to experience the first real eruptions from Mount Sibo. Barry directs the driver of his vehicle to swing by the bunker, where he knows Owen and Claire were meant to try and stop the eruption. He wants to extract them now. But before they can process the destroyed Jurassic World utility vehicle, Toro attacks. Barry's team springs into action to subdue the hungry Carnotaur. We cut back to the tunnels, where Wu's people have their guns trained on our protagonists. They want Claire's group to return with them to their headquarters rather than return to the docks with news of Wu's activities. When Owen and the rest refuse to budge, Wu warns them that InGen security was under orders to keep the secret at all costs. Owen in turn threatens that if Tim Murphy ever found out they'd fired weapons at him, they could all kiss their jobs goodbye. There's a tense moment where neither side is backing down, and triggers are about to be squeezed, when from one of the hallways, Blue the Velociraptor attacks one of the gunmen. The scene devolves into chaos, with Wu's group sprinting in the direction of their secret headquarters, and Zia leading the main cast in the direction of the docks. Owen hesitating at first, but eventually also fleeing, and Blue gives chase to them. We'll get a quick scene of a chopper landing on the green next to Mills, Tim Murphy, and their golfing crew. It is demarcated as an InGen asset. Mills will deadpan ask Tim if he recognizes the aircraft, and further explain that it was time to collect what was owed. He then invites/orders Tim to board the helicopter with him, which Tim sourly does. In the tunnels, Claire's group rushes down the trembling corridors, Blue in hot pursuit. They come up to a door that requires a code to get through. As Zia attempts to get the door open, Blue reaches them, springing into the air at Lowry. Owen tackles him out of the way, and as the animal gets back up, so too does Owen. They have a stare down now, where Owen does his silly hand thing and tries to talk Blue down. The raptor seems to recognize Owen, and though clearly anxious and hostile, pauses her attack on the humans. She suddenly growls though, spins around, and is met with a trank dart to the neck. It's Barry and his team, and although Owen is at first angry with Barry about putting Blue's trust of Owen at risk, Barry reminds him that Owen was no longer her trainer, and asks how Owen had otherwise been planning to get her off site in the first place. Barry's team gather up the raptor for transport. We can get a few quick scenes of the chaos playing out on the uncollected animals of Isla Nublar, on some of Wheatley's team still out in the field, and of the operation to board the animals in the ships as the volcano continues its eruption. One of the large chunks of rocks and lava slams into the seawall of the Mosasaurus Lagoon, leaving a huge hole in the pen. We come to Wu and his people as they finish securing the Indominus 2, which we would only see glimpses of at this point. Their operation appears to be mostly underground, but they are currently at surface for the extraction of their failed experiment. 3 helicopters appear for their extraction, and Wu seems at first relieved, shouting at his group to prepare to hook up the Indominus 2's transport cage to the dangling tethers of one of the choppers. The other 2 land nearby, and Wu rushes to board one of them, only to be greeted by a triumphant Mills and a somber Tim Murphy. With Claire's team hitching a ride with Barry's, Blue sedated in the back of that big truck, the island continues to fall apart around them. We focus on Zia during this time as she watches everything unfurl with internalized guilt. They make the boats and are quickly ushered aboard Wheatley's flagship by the frantic crew members, the last helicopter delivering Toro to the upper deck of the ship. Their mission a failure, the main team plus Barry watch from the railings as the island is consumed by smoke, lava, and pyroclastic flow. We catch glimpses of iconic places from the films being overwhelmed by the volcano's eruption: the Visitor Center, the Innovation Center and Main Street, the pterosaur cage, the gates. The roaring of dying animals can just be heard over the din. Just as in the finished film, a pair of brachiosaurs lumber onto the dock in a bid to escape their fate, but are engulfed by a cloud of death. Here, Zia seems to recognize the dinosaurs as animals for the first time and voices her distress over her inability to save the island. Claire and Lowry comfort her. Owen, meanwhile, grabs Barry and pulls him aside, telling him that whatever happens, they can't allow these animals to be brought to Isla Sorna. Claire notices their little meeting and interrupts to ask why not. Owen tries to deflect, but Claire is finally starting to crack under the strain of all the stress and all of these lies and these hidden agendas and half-truths, and she explodes on him, angry that even though she had shielded him from media scrutiny in the wake of the fall of Jurassic World, he had not done his part to show appreciation for that or even understand her position, and had furthermore failed to support her emotionally through such a trying time. She admits she made mistakes which cost innocent lives because she put her faith in the wrong people. Was he the wrong people now? Owen is hurt, and he finally relents and tells her that Isla Sorna's ecosystem had, after all these years, found equilibrium. The introduction of these new dinosaurs would destabilize the island's wildlife and delay the research being done there. When Claire asks what research, Owen clams up as the 3-engine branded helicopters, one of them carrying the Indominus II, close in and begin landing on the deck of the ship. As Mills, Murphy, and Wu disembark from their chopper, Owen and Claire rush up to confront them. Wu is making his desperate plea to not destroy the Indominus II, but Mills eventually cuts him off, asking what in the world gave InGen the impression that he wanted to destroy the Indominus II. On the contrary, the Indominus II was Mills' ticket to a military contract, a proof of concept to the highest bidder, regardless of the government, that Masrani Global could supply a game-changing strategy to war efforts. The Indominus II may not be the perfected specimen that brought Jurassic World low, but it contained the DNA Mills would need to create an army of healthy, aggressive dinosaur hybrids, DNA that Murphy and Wu had denied him by hiding the deformed Indominus for so long. Claire is, of course, horrified by Mills' admission, and the whole scope of the situation hits her like a ton of bricks. Mills, she says, didn't just want this to happen. He made it happen. Mount Sibo being destabilized had been his doing, a way to flush Wu from hiding to take possession of the Indominus Mills suspected he still had. Claire's whole mission had been a ruse. It had been expected to fail, a goodwill gesture to get her out of the way so that Mills didn't have to worry about the former head of Jurassic World spewing company secrets to the media, especially this one, if he didn't humor her. Owen and Claire tried to tell Mills that Simon Masrani would never allow something like that, and that they should put the Indominus II out of its misery instead. But Mills doesn't care. Masrani Global was his now. The Indominus II was his, and he would march the company into the future. He further adds that the surviving dinosaurs from Nublar were only going to Sorna temporarily. Once he had rehabilitated the image of Masrani Global in the public perception, he would return for their property. He orders his men to lock them in the brig until they reach the mainland. Owen pleads to Tim Murphy that the rest of the dinosaurs could not be allowed to live on Isla Sorna. There's a familiarity between them, and we get the sense that the two somehow know each other. But then Owen and Claire are dragged away by Wheatley and his men. Watching this happen from a safe distance are Barry, Zia, and Lowry, who begin brainstorming what their next move is. Their attention is suddenly drawn to the water as a huge splash turns out to be the Mosasaurus leaping triumphantly into open sea. Lowry, struggling with his fears, gets the spark of an idea. He asks Barry to take him to the communications room and asks Zia if she could build an underwater microphone with parts from the ship. Zia says yes, but she's confused as to what the plan is, to which Lowry will reply, "It's something terrifying." We go to Tim and Wu, helplessly standing next to the transport cage housing the Indominus II, which is starting to wake up. The island continues to burn in the background, the ship still close to the melting shores. Wu is saying he agrees with Owen and Claire about the applications Mills was discussing, but that if it was the only way to keep their animal alive and their research going, then there were worse outcomes than this. Tim rants that he is sick of being outmaneuvered by Mills, frustrated that the Indominus II's potential had been stripped from InGen again, and his plans to use that potential to split from Masrani were now derailed. Maybe Mills was right after all. Maybe Tim just wasn't cut out to be the head of a multi-million-dollar company and should have been a paleontologist instead. Wu asks why Owen had been so sure that Sorna's ecosystem had achieved equilibrium. Tim then reveals that there was a reason Owen's raptor training program had progressed as far as it did in so little time. There was someone on Isla Sorna feeding them research on wild raptors and also keeping track of the dinosaur's population. In the comms room, Zia frantically cannibalizes a few parts from the tech around them, including a long waterproof cable. Lowry searches his laptop files and vaguely Wheatley explains that he's searching for the proper sounds. A few moments later, they're both ready. They run out to the deck where they rig Zia's contraption to Lowry's computer before she tosses the piece of equipment at the end of the cable over the side of the ship. Lowry presses a button and the baleful cries of a humpback whale now emanate from the Franken mic into the water, catching the attention of the giant marine reptile newly released into the vast ocean. Owen and Claire are led into the brig by Wheatley and his people. Before they can be imprisoned, however, the ship is rocked by some large impact. Owen takes the opportunity to fight the surprised guards, with Barry making a perfectly timed assist from out of nowhere. The Mosasaurus continues to attack the ship, and we get some shots of the crew falling and scrambling to lock things down. We also see some of the dinosaurs roaring and bellowing from the tremors, including a fully alert Blue, who screams in her cage. Wu and Tim Murphy are slammed around the deck close to the now awakened Indominus 2, which roars angrily in its transport cage. Mills, on the bridge, screams for someone to tell him what's going on. Owen and Barry wrestle the rifle out of Wheatley's hand and demand that he divert the fleet away from their course to Sorna. Ken Wheatley refuses, but they push him out of the brig and at gunpoint begin to lead him to the bridge. The Mosasaur continues to relentlessly beat against the bottom of the ship. In the bridge, Mills is relieved to hear from the crew that the Mosasaurus didn't appear to be strong enough to breach the hull, but that relief is short-lived when the Mosasaur manages to hit the ship enough that the navigator cannot keep the bow on course. They had been traveling parallel to the island shoreline before, but now their heading was nearly perpendicular. They were being driven right into the reef ringing the island. The captain gives the order to kill the engines, but it's too late. The ship hull slams into the corals and rock at nearly full speed. The impact throws everything and everyone around. Chaos ensues as multiple cages containing carnivores, both on deck and within the hold, which had not yet been secured, are flung open. A few of them even break open, or at least partially open, including the one containing Nublar's greatest queen. Blue's cage, on the other hand, has tipped over, injuring the poor raptor. The Mosasaurus loses interest as the sound of whale prey is terminated by the impact, and she swims away into the deep. The engine's now dead. The crippled ship floats closer to the boiling water surrounding the lava-engulfed shores of Isla Nublar. Now on deck, but not yet at the bridge, Owen, Claire, Barry, and Wheatley all recover from the impact. Owen, realizing what's about to happen, demands to know where Blue is being kept, and Wheatley tells him, now more concerned with his life than with preserving his paycheck. The three protagonists rush to find Blue, leaving Wheatley to his own devices. On the deck, Tim and Wu get to their feet. Tim looks around at the chaos. He can see Mills through the windows of the bridge shouting at everyone. Several carnivores, including a Baryonyx, a Metriacanthosaurus, and a Ceratosaurus, are now loose on deck. He sees the shape of his Indominus frantically pacing in its cage, and he makes a choice. He sprints across the deck to the cage, and using the electronic keypad, unlocks the cage door before racing away to find cover. We finally get our first good look at the Indominus 2 as it limps out of its cage, roaring loudly. It is slightly larger than its sister, and it has several notable deformities, including exposed bones, a stunted right arm, extra digits, malformed teeth, one blind eye, a stubby tail, and skin discolorations. Wu gives a classic
Timmy! What have you done?
in response. In lower parts of the ship, hot water is starting to flow in through the gash in the ship's side. In the hold, Owen, Claire, and Barry make their way through the corridors of cages that roar with fear, anger, and hunger. They find Blue, who seems to have injured her tail during the impact with the reef. As Owen fusses over her through the bars, Claire wonders out loud if it was even safe to save Blue. She had acted so feral towards him in the tunnels, and even now seemed more aggressive than Claire remembered. Owen quietly reminds her that raptors are social animals, and Blue had just spent 3 years alone without the benefit of the pack she had been raised with. The first Indominus was such a threat because it was an intelligent, social creature raised in isolation. Blue had had to live that life too. Was it any wonder she was so ferocious now? Claire now better understands how Owen might have been feeling in the aftermath of Jurassic World, mourning the deaths of 3 of his animals and missing and worrying about the one that was still alive, and he felt abandoned and alone. As they are figuring out how to help Blue without putting themselves in danger, which involves getting a helicopter to take her out of there, they hear heavy footsteps approaching. It's Toro the Carnotaurus. Owen slams the open button on Blue's cage, freeing the raptor. Blue and the Carno engage in prehistoric fisticuffs while the gang flees the immediate area. Owen hangs back to help Blue, firing Wheatley's rifle at a distance, while Claire and Barry escape the hold entirely. They meet up with Zia and Lowry on deck, explaining they intended to commandeer one of the helicopters. As they speak, they notice the screaming and chaos that has sprung up. They see the Indominus 2 rampaging about the deck, killing and destroying everything in its path, and several smaller dinosaurs doing their best to make things things worse. They run and dodge, action, action, action. Down in the hold, Blue is getting a few good licks in, but Toro is just too large a foe. Owen sees an opening and whistles for her to disengage. Blue at first hesitates, but then heeds the command, chasing Owen up the stairs and out of the hold. Blue knocks him down as they make it to the deck. He is able to get to his feet and do the magic hand thing. Blue snarls, but doesn't immediately attack. Mills is watching everything go to hell from the bridge. He shouts for someone to trank the Indominus 2, and several men leave to do so. But despite all the non-lethals, it doesn't appear to be at all phased. The ship has now floated into the area of boiling water around the island, grounding itself on the rocky bottom. Some of the smaller carnivores get trank darts in their necks. Tim and Wu intercept Claire's group and agree to lead them to the InGen chopper, provided they knew someone who could fly, which turns out to be Barry. Wheatley makes it to the bridge, and he and Mills have a tense interaction in which Mills demands he get things under control. Wheatley leaves for the deck. Mills notices Wu, Murphy, and the others arriving at the InGen chopper. When no one is able to leave the bridge to intervene, Mills decides he'll do it himself. He grabs a spare rifle and heads out. Blue and Owen are still staring each other down. Finally, the Indominus 2's rampage draws near, breaking the moment. Owen sees his chance and books it, with Blue once again close behind. Barry is starting up the InGen chopper. Claire tells Zia and Lowry what Owen intended to do with Blue, and they begin using the tow lines to hook up the nearest vacant cage. Tim and Wu, meanwhile, are staring at the Indominus 2. Its rampage just continues. Wheatley and his men are firing trank dart after trank dart at it. Some bounce off its scales, others bury in its hide. At a certain point, the hybrid weakens enough to drop heavily to the deck. Wu reacts emotionally, slipping through Murphy's grasping hands to run for his animal. He makes it close to the Indominus 2 when Mills intercepts him, clocking him over the head with the butt of the rifle. Wu pleads with him to let him administer the proper dosage of tranquilizer to the Indominus 2, that it is already in a great deal of anguish as a matter of existence, and that this whole debacle would only worsen its quality of life. But Mills is only at this moment interested in keeping Wu on the boat with the dinosaur, because Wu contained all the knowledge needed to care for it and make more of them. Tim tackles Mills, knocking the gun out of his hand. The Indominus 2 recovers its strength enough to snap at Mills, but it misses and gives chase as Mills flees. Mills will then, in the process of escaping, accidentally fall overboard. There's a moment of confusion as the Indominus 2 watches him be boiled alive, screaming, a victim of his own decision to activate the volcano. The camera lingers on the panting dinosaur's one good eye, the open wounds, the painful sores spread across its body. We get the sense that the animal is in a constant state of pain, and it is tired. It roars in frustration at the edge of the boat as trank darts continue pelting its skin. Wheatley is at first stunned by Mills' sudden death, but quickly recovers and orders his men to put the monster down. He also demands that someone contact the other ships to prepare for more cargo and crew. The dinosaur starts getting shot at with real weaponry now, despite Wu's cries for it to stop. Owen, meanwhile, has been dodging people, equipment, and other dinosaurs in his bid to escape/save Blue. Claire catches his attention with a flare. He makes it to the cage and spins in time to see Blue leap at him. He rolls out of the way and Blue lands within the confines of the cage. Lowry and Zia slam the gate closed. They all clamber aboard just in time to watch Rexy, drawn by the flare, finally crash through her own broken cage. Wheatley's men, who had been relentlessly spewing fire at the weakening Indominus 2, turn their attention to the Rex, who begins her own tear on deck. Wheatley wants her alive, so they use the tranks on her. As they turn their back on the Indominus 2, Wu quickly approaches it. There is an almost tender moment between the two. Then, to Tim and Wu's horror, the dinosaur uses what little strength it has to heave itself over the cargo ship's gunwale. It falls into the boiling sea and, like Mills, burns alive. Tim grabs Wu and the pair race back to the chopper as Wheatley's men struggle with the Tyrannosaur. With everyone aboard, Barry lifts the chopper into the sky, Blue's cage hanging below them, leaving behind the mayhem on the deck of the flagship. There is a quiet moment in which they can see the carnage and also the other two ships maneuvering closely outside the reef. We cut to a little later. Wheatley and the rest of the expedition crew have successfully gained control of the situation. A lackey asks him what's next, and he explains that they were dropping the Masrani employees off where they'd picked them up in Costa Rica. And after that, well, their benefactor was dead and gone, and their holds were full of the most valuable cargo in the world. It was time to cash the checks. With this, I'm positioning the animals to be released to the mainland, just as in the film we got, so that a third Jurassic World in this continuity could still deal with that concept. We return to our protagonists. A sorrowful Wu will commiserate with Zia, of all people, just to kind of close out her arc from cold to warmish. Wu hadn't ever considered his personal feelings for the Indominus 2, only her worth to him as an experiment. But now he realized he wasn't just mourning the loss of his chance to fix his poor work, but mourning the animal herself. We also get a brief conversation between Claire and Lowry, where the former will give him props for his ingenuity and courage in luring the Mosasaurus to attack the ship. Lowry, of course, would have some self-deprecating response that gets a laugh out of the audience. Barry will mention to Owen, who is holding hands with Claire, that their contact would be waiting for them at the landing site, and Claire will realize when she looks out her window at the approaching land that it wasn't Costa Rica, it was another island. Owen reveals that they are about to land on Isla Sorna, and Tim is the only other one who doesn't look surprised or terrified at all, sharing a knowing glance with Owen. The cage lands first, followed by the chopper. Owen and Barry, who are armed along with Tim, disembark. Very familiar voice greets them from off screen. Looking older, rougher, more rugged than we've ever seen him, Dr. Alan Grant appears from the jungle. Owen and Barry shake his hand while Tim and Grant embrace. As it turns out, once Tim became head of Ingen, he had covertly helped set Grant up on Isla Sorna. In the aftermath of the events of Jurassic Park 3, Grant longed to return to the island to study the animals, seeing them now less as theme park monsters and more like reasonable facsimiles of the dinosaurs he idolized. His research on the raptors helped fuel Owen's own work, and the two had a working relationship. Tim had provided Grant with shelter and would have care packages, equipment, even furniture quietly dropped in to make Grant's stay as safe and as comfortable as possible. Then it is time to release what Grant calls the famous Blue. Everyone but Owen piles into the helicopter cabin and watches with bated breath through the windows as Grady gingerly unlocks the cage. Blue takes menacing steps towards him, but after a few tense moments, she sniffs the air and looks around curiously. Then, without waiting for Owen's command, she begins to run off. She gives him a final look and then disappears into the thicket. Grant and Claire disembark from the helicopter. Claire holds him close, and Grant reassures him that Blue, who he describes as beautiful, will join her own kind here. She would find a new pack, a new family. Claire will whisper that it was time for them to go too. They had a very isolated cabin to build together. The film ends with Blue rushing through the jungle with swelling, triumphant, brassy, end of Jurassic movie music playing until she comes up short and roars at something off screen. When the camera switches POV, we see it's the pack of raptors from Jurassic Park 3. The white female honking in response to the new raptor in their midst. Roll credits. Fallen Kingdom ultimately fell into the same trap that Lost World did before it, and that is naming the film after the island it's supposedly set on before abandoning the location for its finales. In the case of Fallen Kingdom, it's even more egregious because we spend less than a third of the film actually on Nublar. It gives the narrative a really disjointed feel. Fallen Kingdom isn't about anything either. There's no catharsis to be found here, forcing unearned character emotions to factor into the pivotal moment when Maisie frees the dinosaurs. There's hardly any character depth, thematic resonance, or genuine scares. With the exception of one or two truly great scenes, an interesting concept or two, and some good performances from most of the cast, this movie is practically worthless. I barely used any of the actual film in my fix because the conceit was so unsalvageable that I simply couldn't. In all the previous fixes, I frequently use some form of the phrase as in the delivered film or just like in the realized movie, and that would sometimes take care of an entire scene or concept for me. But with this one, I didn't have a good roadmap when I started writing. I had broken bits and pieces, underdeveloped ideas to link to genuinely good scenes, all scattered and chaotic, and it gives me no pleasure to say that. I truly love this franchise, and I hope that does come through in my videos, even when I'm being critical, but it is so hard to root for this movie sometimes. I started with where the returning characters would be mentally and emotionally and thematically. Lowry was such a great character, and he never really got a hero moment, and he deserved one. And where was Wu? Where had he gone? What was a little bit more interesting than he just ran to Ben Lockwood? Owen had to be missing his dinosaurs and worrying for Blue's well-being. After all, he'd raised them from infancy. He needed to come to grips with that to grow. Claire was likely feeling an immense amount of guilt over her decisions, and I wanted her in my story to come to the realization that she had subconsciously drawn out her time away from Owen because she didn't think she deserved to be happy. These were rich narrative veins to tap, and the writers of Fallen Kingdom ignored the mind in favor of a bland, featureless desert, showing us just more dinosaurs, more generic, unrealistic action, and another conceptually silly hybrid animal. Frustrating doesn't do it justice. It's maddening. Beyond what I wanted to explore in terms of characters, there were several concepts I wanted to make sure were part of this story. The first was that the action take place mostly on the island as the volcano exploded. One last hurrah to Nublar before she became narratively unusable in the franchise, and also so any follow-up story on the mainland would feel more impactful and disorienting. Second, I wanted to deal with the Indominus sibling, which we already discussed earlier. And third, I knew I wanted both Tim Murphy and Alan Grant back. For a while, I envisioned an entire subplot where we follow Alan Grant on Sorna as he tracks InGen activity there and discovers the second Indominus. But I realized that it split the narrative too much, and I didn't want to repeat the same mistakes Dominion makes with my story. So I settled for dropping hints via Owen and Tim until we get that end scene cameo. Lastly, I knew I didn't want the finale to just be another dinosaur on dinosaur scuffle. I wanted to break the cycle because certain things should absolutely be held for conclusions, not middle beats. Now that I've worked myself into a real lather, what are some of your thoughts on Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom? Let me know down in the comments, and stay tuned for more Jurassic content coming your way. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be the first to know when I've posted a new video. I'll be wrapping up this particular clown show with Dominion soon, so stick around for that. Like and share and melt this down in the comments. I'm Brian I. This is Jurassic Kingdom. Later, nerds. I simply don't understand this Luddite attitude, especially from a scientist. I mean, how can we stand in the light of discovery and not act?